A body lay neatly on a stone pedestal. Beside it, a pair of high-heeled shoes were carefully arranged as if in a bizarre ritual. The victim's chest had been ripped open, her internal organs missing without a trace. As similar cases occurred repeatedly, the police discovered the killer seemed to be sending a mysterious message. Langer was a young billionaire, handsome and wealthy. His eccentricities were perfectly normal. In his distorted worldview, hunting for blonde beauties was a sublime evolutionary art of humanity. Before each act, he carefully selected a bouquet of lilies, symbolizing purity, accompanied by a box of exquisite handcrafted chocolates. The scent of fresh flowers could evoke a relaxing, joyful, emotional response, and the enjoyment of chocolate represented a romantic ritual of death. Behind the mural in his luxurious mansion lay a meticulously polished set of murder tools. Each item had left a fatal mark on the bodies of those women. Even though the blonde beauties wept and begged desperately, he showed no compassion. Without hesitation, he raised his iron hammer and mercilessly smashed their exquisite faces. In just 1 month, 4 bodies appeared in quick succession, putting unprecedented pressure on the police. All the victims were murdered in the exact same manner. The killer seemed to be performing some kind of ritual. He dissected their bodies, removed all their internal organs, and then expertly sewed them back together. The press was terrified because this killer resembled Osiris, the god of death in Egyptian mythology. This terrifying name quickly spread. Faced with this perplexing case, the prosecution entrusted the task to a seasoned female detective named Carolina. She immediately drove to several locations where the victims' bodies were found to conduct investigations. She discovered that all the victims had been dumped like garbage in dark, damp, underground sewers. There were no witnesses at the scene. No clues left by the perpetrator were found on the victims' bodies. Even the most knowledgeable forensic pathologist had to admit the killer's dissection technique was frighteningly professional. The precision was comparable to surgical expertise. Even more horrifying was that each body was meticulously cleaned, not a speck of dust remaining. Despite the victims having been dead for some time, there was no trace of foul odor. However, with years of experience dealing with serial killers, Carolina shrewdly realized that this type of killer would unconsciously leave behind a unique personal mark. She insisted on a second, more thorough autopsy. The independent forensic report showed no toxins in the victim's blood. This meant the victims most likely endured a cruel and inhumane live surgery while fully conscious. Carolina's keen eye caught a detail that was easily overlooked. A tiny stab wound was imprinted on one of the victim's toes. As night fell, Langer, in his capacity as a member of the upper class, appeared at a charity auction. His exquisitely tailored suit accentuated his upright posture. Every gesture exuded the refined elegance of the upper class. In everyone's eyes, this handsome young billionaire was a role model of philanthropy and charitable work. But no one knew how twisted and sinister his desires lay behind that glamorous facade. In this civilized society still governed by the law, he could only conceal his dark impulses behind a perfect mask. The theme of the auction that night was helping young people addicted to drugs. When Langer spoke, he subtly alluded to the ancient Egyptian belief that organ harvesting could purify the soul. Just then, a beautiful blonde woman entered the hall. She was exactly the type of woman he desired. Carolina was watching the auction live on her computer. Upon hearing Langer's words, she immediately searched for relevant documents. She was horrified to discover that the techniques of this ancient Egyptian ritual matched the details of the serial murder case in a striking way. An urgent call from a colleague interrupted her thoughts. A 5th body had just been discovered in the suburbs. This time, the victim was deliberately placed on a stone platform. Her high-heeled shoes were neatly arranged beside her. Just like before, the victim's chest had been precisely cut open. Her internal organs were missing. Carolina examined the victim's toes and discovered the mysterious stab wound. When she showed the video of Langer's speech to her colleague, he seemed to believe the renowned philanthropist. Instinctively, he felt that her conclusion that Langer was the killer, based solely on a few statements about ancient Egypt, was unconvincing. The auction process suddenly went awry. The next item up for auction mysteriously disappeared. Just as the host was bewildered, a blonde woman stepped onto the stage and offered to auction herself. She was an interior designer, and the item up for auction was her interior design. The winner would not only receive professional design services, but also enjoy a candlelit dinner with her. This unique offer immediately heated up the atmosphere. Langer, who was already interested in the beauty, immediately bid 30,000 euros, but under the enthusiastic crowd, the price quickly soared to 50,000 euros. In the end, a middle-aged businessman won. However, he was clearly not interested in the design and subtly hinted at wanting to invite the beauty to his home. When she flatly refused, Langer offered 150,000 euros to buy the opportunity. Tempted by this, the businessman happily accepted the deal. In their subsequent conversation, Nina, with her strong personality, said she hated being treated like a commodity to be bought and sold. She believed she was perfectly capable of handling such a situation. This arrogance and defiance only further fueled Langer's interest. He excused himself from the hall and instructed his driver to drive around the neighborhood. At the same time, he used his computer to conduct a thorough investigation of Nina's background. After confirming that her identity was correct, he signaled the driver to return to the hall. When the auction ended, Nina unhesitatingly walked towards the luxurious car where Langer was waiting. They returned to the opulent villa, steeped in artistic flair. While Nina was engrossed in admiring the interior decorations, Langer secretly poured a clear liquid into her wine glass. But when Nina took the glass of wine, she hesitated for a long time before drinking it. Instead, she seemed particularly interested in the decor of the office. When she stopped in front of a bookshelf and asked for a book as payment, Langer confidently pulled out the prints and boasted about the pleasures of power and control. He was completely unaware that, at that very moment, the two glasses of wine on the table had been swapped. When he woke up, it was the next day. He found himself tied to a chair. Only then did he realize he had misjudged her. Nina held a hammer, seemingly eager to strike him in the temple. Then she took out a knife and asked him how he usually killed people. Why didn't he teach a novice like her? He asked if she did it for money. Her expression changed, and she put down the knife. She transferred 20 bitcoins from his computer right in front of him. After receiving the money, she didn't leave but began cooking breakfast in the kitchen. Clearly, money wasn't her real purpose. After Langer struggled to free himself from the ropes and fell to the ground, Nina revealed her true intentions. Her husband had another woman outside the marriage, and she hoped Langer could help her kill that woman. The woman in the photo Nina showed him was Carolina. Nina unexpectedly handed Langer the sharp knife she was holding. The two thus reached a secret agreement. However, after Nina left, Langer continuously monitored her actions through surveillance cameras. He even sent his bodyguards to follow her. When Nina went out, the first thing she did was send and discard her memory card. Realizing she was being followed, she entered a clothing store, changed clothes, and sneaked out through the back door. The helpless bodyguards could only report to Langer that he had lost track of Nina. Langer's murderous desires remained unfulfilled. He arranged for a girl from his charity's rehabilitation center to be brought in. This girl had run away from home 5 years prior and had lost all contact with her family. Now, she had successfully overcome her addiction and was completely clean. She was quickly brought to Langer's apartment. The naive girl thought she had met a good person. She was excitedly examining the luxurious furnishings in the room when a secret door appeared on the wall. Seeing no one around, she curiously crept inside. Unexpectedly, after only a few steps, she was locked inside. After escaping her pursuer, Nina quietly went to a shop in the wholesale market. Waiting for her inside was Carolina. The girl locked in the secret door quickly became the latest material for Langer's artwork. As classical music echoed in the operating room, he was using antiseptic alcohol to clean the girl's cold body. Just as the knife was about to cut into her pale skin, a phone call unexpectedly interrupted his ritual. A violent glint flashed in Langer's eyes. Seeing the internal number displayed on the screen, he forced himself to suppress his anger and answer. The other end of the line delivered the latest findings from Nina's background investigation. After hanging up, Langer's expression darkened. He picked up a sharper knife from the tool rack and aimed it precisely at the girl's chest. It turned out that Nina was a spy planted by Carolina beside Langer. She was a former police officer, but had been dismissed for using excessive force against a rapist. She was chosen for this dangerous mission not only because of her professional investigative skills, but also because her blonde hair, blue eyes, and slender figure perfectly suited the killer's preferences. During the mission briefing, Carolina showed Nina dozens of photos of meticulously dissected female corpses. The police suspected that the serial murders, spanning several years, were linked to Langer. However, they were constantly hampered by a lack of direct evidence. For Nina, this mission was her only chance to return to the police force. If she could obtain concrete evidence of Langer's involvement in the murders, she would clear her criminal record and regain her police badge. Therefore, she not only orchestrated the encounter at the auction, but also arranged for a colleague to pose as someone involved in an affair, gradually luring Langer into revealing his weaknesses. However, he was no ordinary man. Although attracted by Nina's mysterious aura, he immediately launched a thorough investigation into her background. Through his special access to the police department's internal network, he quickly discovered a disturbing anomaly. Her record was so clean, it didn't seem like that of a real person. She had no records of her possessions, nor any trace of her daily life. Even the most basic traffic violations couldn't be traced. This deliberately created emptiness only deepened Langer's suspicion. He began to suspect that this woman, who had suddenly appeared, might be hiding some unknown purpose. That afternoon, Langer went to the design company Nina had registered under. Ignoring the receptionist's attempts to stop him, he roughly pushed open the office door. He found no one inside. lie. When Nina returned to the company that afternoon, her secretary had vanished without a trace. Only a piece of paper Langer had left behind lay silently on the desk. Sensing something was wrong, she went to Langer's villa alone. When she pushed open the heavy door, Nina saw her secretary tied tightly to a chair, her face contorted with terror. In Langer's hand, he clutched his familiar iron hammer. To force the truth out of Nina, he used the secretary's life as a form of punishment. He began a brutal interrogation. Every time Nina hesitated slightly in her answers, the iron hammer would mercilessly strike her arm. The sound of bones shattering and the secretary's agonizing screams echoed deafeningly in the empty room. Fortunately, Nina and Carolina had anticipated this situation. Nina calmly explained why she changed her surname to her mother's after the divorce, and affirmed that all assets were registered under her ex-husband's name. When Langer pressed her about her family background, she responded fluently. She recited the names and birth dates of her parents, every detail easily verifiable. Seeing Langer's expression soften, Nina seized the opportunity to emphasize once again her intense hatred for her ex-husband. She even vividly described wanting to disembowel him. To completely dispel Langer's suspicions, Nina proactively approached him. In the ambiguous atmosphere, he recounted that his first victim was his 13-year-old ex-girlfriend. At that time, Langer's father helped him clean up the mess. Just as Nina tried to get more information, he suddenly stopped. It was Nina's first time experimenting with herself, but he became wary and left her alone on the sofa. However, the bound secretary had overheard things she shouldn't have. It seemed Langer wouldn't let her leave unscathed. Back home, Nina retrieved the miniature recording device from the lining of her coat, but she discovered that the recorded conversation was completely obscured by jarring electronic noise. Clearly, Langer's mansion was equipped with a sophisticated jamming system. While she was feeling a headache from his caution, she was completely unaware that he had planted a tracking device on her. The next day, the bodyguard, disguised as a delivery man, easily pinpointed Nina's residence. Nina returned to the company to review the security camera footage. The footage clearly showed that only Langer had left the previous day. The person who escorted the secretary was a man wearing a hat pulled down low, concealing his face. This meant that even if the police later found the secretary's body, they absolutely could not directly link the crime to Langer. Meanwhile, Carolina made a major breakthrough while analyzing the victims' backgrounds. She discovered that all the women victims had one thing in common: they had all received treatment at a rehabilitation center run by Langer's charity. This discovery confirmed her suspicions. He was using the rehabilitation center to carefully select victims to suit his preferences. However, they currently lacked the evidence to prosecute him legally. In a secret meeting at the wholesale market, after Carolina learned that the secretary might have been murdered, she immediately proposed a new plan of action. She hoped Nina could find a way to locate the secret place Langer used to dispose of the body. Once they knew the burial site, they could officially prosecute him for murder. But Nina brought up the missing secretary, an ordinary girl kidnapped in broad daylight from her workplace and then vanished from the face of the earth. She hoped Carolina would inform the secretary's family. Langer did not give up investigating Nina. By bribing high-ranking officials in the investigation bureau, Langer obtained all the forged documents impersonating Nina. This included Carolina's friend posing as Nina's adulterous husband and their child. This discovery caused Langer to immediately adjust his strategy. He had his subordinates follow the boy on his way home from school. He used this as leverage to blackmail Nina. However, the police seemed to have prepared a security plan beforehand. A thrilling chase officially began. He slowly put on a transparent raincoat. His long, slender fingers gently caressed the pretty face of the young woman. Langer had a particular fondness for these young women. The rehabilitation center was established by his charity foundation. This was a hunting reserve he built. Under the guise of free rehabilitation, this seemingly charitable organization specialized in taking in young women who had fallen into delinquency. Every week, the center's manager would send Langer photos of the newly recovered young women for him to carefully select. In the photos, the lovely appearance of two girls caught his attention. He immediately ordered his subordinates to bring the two girls to his private villa. Before his prey arrived, Langer always meticulously prepared everything himself. He personally mixed the fresh fruit juice. Meanwhile, his subordinates injected a special concoction into the chocolate. Every detail was meticulously handled. When the two girls entered the mansion, they were immediately overwhelmed by the opulent and extravagant scene, leaving them flustered. Langer, using his status as a top billionaire, personally greeted them and warmly shook their hands. Every gesture exuded the demeanor of a gentleman, without a hint of arrogance. The older sister, Karina, was drawn to the box of premium chocolates on the tea table. While Langer turned his back, she secretly slipped a piece into her mouth. Langer then offered to hire them to look after the mansion for a salary of $5,000 a month and provide perfect benefits packages. This This offer delighted the two girls. They were completely unsuspecting of the glass of juice Langer offered them. Perhaps some might consider this scammer clumsy, but the image of the perfect philanthropist that Langer had cultivated had deeply ingrained itself in people's minds. Moreover, there were many money-hungry girls eager to seize this opportunity to change their lives. The drug took effect very quickly. Karina had secretly eaten chocolate, so she had taken double the dose. Just as she stood up to go to the bathroom, she staggered and collapsed. Her younger sister Aldona also felt dizzy. Lang gently helped her sit down on a chair. He sighed, his voice laced with mockery, as if they were always deluding themselves into thinking they could enjoy high salaries without working. Aldona's consciousness gradually returned. In her blurry vision, she found herself lying on a cold floor. She struggled to support her weak body, using all her strength to crawl towards the door. In the basement, Lang tied the unconscious Karina to the operating table. Suddenly, he heard a faint rustling sound coming from upstairs. A glint of excitement flashed in his eyes. He slowly removed his gloves and followed the sound back to the living room. Seeing Aldona about to crawl to the door, he pulled her back to the basement. She cried out in despair. That appearance was his favorite sight. Soon after, Lange's luxurious car, carrying Nina, pulled up in front of the house. She had been summoned because she had previously stated she wanted to kill her husband. She feigned intimacy, snuggling into his arms and recounting her hatred for him. Then she lightly bit his earlobe, leaving a suggestive bite mark. Seeing the faint blood on his fingertip, he suddenly gripped her wrist, implying that her beautiful hands still needed more practice. Just as he was about to use voice commands to open the basement door, intending for Nina to personally kill the other woman as proof, the doorbell unexpectedly rang. Two familiar figures appeared on the camera screen. Lang smiled meaningfully, glancing at Nina, whose expression was gradually changing. She hadn't expected Carolina to suddenly appear at this very moment. A thrilling game had officially begun. Carolina led a special forces team to raid Lange's mansion. According to reports, a pair of sisters who had just left a rehabilitation center had disappeared after being brought here. With a search warrant in hand, the police quickly dispersed. Meanwhile, in the secret basement, Nina was desperately being gagged. Before her lay a female corpse, her head smashed with a hammer. Brains and blood splattered on the floor. Unexpectedly, a figure emerged from the shadows behind her. While the police searched, Carolina spoke to Lang, who was cleaning his cruel knife. The blade reflected the cold light under the chandelier. He gestured towards her, revealing the true face behind the philanthropist's mask. Although this scene was ultimately just a twisted thought, she could clearly feel the surging murderous intent in his eyes. The police had searched the entire mansion but couldn't find the two girls. Carolina suspected his house had a hidden chamber, but he was a renowned philanthropist, so she couldn't openly bring people to dig up the ground there. She helplessly led the police team back. When Lang descended into the underground chamber once more, he found Nina sitting and smoking in front of the pool of blood. The smoke rising from her fingertips created a surreal contrast with the newly added corpse on the floor. He seemed to be using this as a way to relax. A silence passed. This question seemed to have triggered some kind of mechanism. Chains were wrapped around Nina's wrists. Lang swung the leather whip, lashing it forcefully against her pale, bare back. She endured, swallowing her own muffled cries. After Nina left, Lang stood in the empty cellar. In his hands, he caressed the black lace panties she had left behind. His movements were as precise as a forensic doctor's. He carefully used a cotton swab to scrape the dried blood from the whip, placing it in a sealed and properly labeled test tube. Even the few strands of her hair that had fallen on were picked up and placed in a glass jar. Although her hands were stained with blood, his suspicion of her didn't lessen. Nina entered the apartment. After locking the bathroom door, the scalding hot water washed over her skin, but it couldn't wash away the image of that poor girl. At that moment, in the secret room, Aldona suddenly went berserk and lunged at Nina. Nina accidentally pushed Aldona, who hit her head on the edge of the stone table and died instantly. To avoid revealing her identity, she could only swallow her fear and continue playing the role of a cold-blooded accomplice in front of Langer. Only now did the long-suppressed guilt erupt along with the rising steam. The next day, she met Carolina at the clothing market. She coldly said that the raid the previous night had almost exposed her. Carolina revealed that they were searching for the whereabouts of the two missing girls. Nina's fingertips dug into her palms. Her expression remained unchanged as she lied, saying that only she and Langer were at the scene that night. At the same time, she warned Carolina not to act on her own initiative anymore. Before leaving, Carolina urged Nina to quickly trick Langer into taking action against her fake ex-husband. Carolina went to the rehabilitation center run by the charity that Langer headed, using the pretext of an investigation to request access to the security cameras. The doctor, looking worried, explained that to protect the patient's privacy, they had removed the camera system. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the garden. A girl, in a frenzy, grabbed a medical staff member's shirt, screaming incomprehensible words. The doctor quickly put down his phone and rushed to help. Carolina seized the opportunity to use a device to copy all the data from the phone. When the sedative took effect, the girl called Alexandra was dragged away like a broken wooden puppet. When Carolina found her again, her eyes were lifeless. She seemed like an empty shell. No matter how much Carolina called out to her, she didn't react. That girl was the secretary who used to work at Nina's company. She was also a police officer. The injections had eroded her memory. Even her real name had been wiped clean. Only the new identity the rehabilitation center had given her remained. The nurse pulled Carolina aside and told her that Alexandra had been found at a nearby gas station. Her brain had been severely stimulated, rendering her incapable of normal communication. Carolina found Callis's address, her real name, on the doctor's phone. But when Carolina arrived, neighbors said the house had been abandoned for a long time. Clearly, someone was trying to conceal the victims' true identities. At the forensic lab, a new clue was discovered on the body of the most recent female victim. She could complete this crucial chain of evidence. Carolina immediately contacted Nina, hoping she could find the gloves in Langer's house. Earlier, Carolina had mentioned seeing Callis at the rehabilitation center. Her only hope was to find her family. However, before Carolina could take further action, an urgent phone call summoned her to a new body disposal site. Upon arrival, she was shocked to discover the victim was none other than police officer Callis. Her arms were covered in needle marks, and her lifeless eyes were a silent indictment of the killer's cruelty. Clearly, Carolina's prior contact had allowed the killer to act first. Enraged, Carolina stormed into the rehabilitation center to confront the doctors, but the doctors calmly explained that this wasn't a prison. The accident occurred after the patient left the facility on her own accord and had nothing to do with the hospital. Meanwhile, Nina proactively visited Langer's mansion. She began to recount her reasons for wanting to kill her ex-husband. At 19, she took her younger sister to a party. A moment of inattention, and she let her sister out of sight. Hours later, she found her sister, disheveled and trembling, huddled in a dimly lit room. Days later, her sister jumped off a bridge, leaving a suicide note and revealing the identity of her abuser, a promising young lawyer. Although Carolina and Nina reported him to the police, the passage of time and lack of evidence meant the perpetrator remained at large. Now, that lawyer had risen through the ranks to become a prosecutor. Nina resorted to any means to become his wife, but still couldn't find enough evidence to bring him to justice. Therefore, she turned to Langer for help. After hearing her story, he promised to help her achieve her revenge, but on one condition: she would personally participate in the murder. The story rewinds 2 days. The police discovered another young female body on a school stadium, like a worthless doll. The killer still left no clues at the scene. Due to the increasingly shocking nature of the case, the police were forced to invite criminal psychologist Professor Langer to assist in the investigation. This victim was also a teenage drug addict. But unlike before, the killer didn't dispose of the body in a garbage dump. Langer reasoned that this act was a warning to the students, hinting at the fate of addicts. The act of organ harvesting in some ancient religious rituals. Meanwhile, Nina's situation became even more perilous. Since she killed the other girl in the secret room, Langer had begun to treat her as a confidant. He even tattooed his name on her ring finger. To gather evidence to convict Langer, Nina had to pay an unimaginable price. No one could see through her true thoughts hidden behind her mask. That day, she searched the entire house for Langer, but couldn't find him. She accidentally discovered a hidden door next to a fresco that silently opened. Suspicious, she slowly descended into the dimly lit cellar. Langer had been waiting there for a long time, a knowing smile on his lips. He pulled back the curtain, revealing an ancient oil painting. The woman in the painting held a tray of stones containing her husband's skull. Langer spoke in a low voice, introducing the painting as being over 500 years old, its author unknown, yet perfectly suited to a woman planning to eliminate her ex-husband. Nina appeared calm on the outside, but a chill ran through her heart. After Langer left, she secretly slipped the glove he had just taken off into her pocket. Then she went to the clothing market and secretly handed the gloves to Carolina. Upon returning home, Nina also dropped her disguise. She rushed into the bathroom, turning the tap on full blast. The icy water streamed down her trembling hands. Her fingers turned red from scrubbing so hard. She kept doing this, hoping to wash away the invisible dirt. Carolina carefully handed the gloves to a forensic doctor, repeatedly instructing him to keep it absolutely secret. However, this action was witnessed by Matt. She hesitated for a long time under her colleague's questioning, but under Matt's relentless pressure, she finally had to take him to Nina's place. Nina was Matt's ex-wife. Their child was currently being raised by him. When Matt learned that Nina had slept with the psychopathic killer in order to gather evidence, his expression changed instantly. The next morning, Matt went to Professor Langer and recounted the unpleasant details of their marriage. Nina's controlling nature was almost pathological. pathological. Her emotions fluctuated wildly, like the sea during a storm, to the point that even tranquilizers couldn't calm her. What pained him most was that one stormy night, he pushed open the door and found his son locked alone in the bathtub full of cold water, his small body trembling uncontrollably. Since then, the child had inexplicably locked himself in the bathroom. This strange habit worried Matt day and night. He feared his son was following in his mother's footsteps, suffering from psychological trauma. Returning to reality, when Matt pushed open the door to his house, he saw his son packing his clothes and personal belongings into a travel backpack. The boy had expressed a desire to spend the entire weekend at his friend Jack's house. This request came at the perfect time, perfectly coinciding with Carolina's meticulously planned scheme. Matt nodded in agreement without much thought. He was completely unaware that as he turned away, a barely perceptible smile flickered across his son's lips. In a dark corner unseen by the father, Matt and Jack's son had already become engrossed in the twisted activities of the dark web. They donned carefully selected horror masks in encrypted livestream rooms and used every cruel method to torture wild animals for amusement. Over time, those small, bloody creatures no longer stimulated their increasingly numb nerves. After weeks of planning, they turned their evil gaze to the girls in their class. The weekend arrived as scheduled. The two boys had set their trap. They used a birthday party as a pretext to lure a girl to Jack's house. When she fell unconscious, they eagerly set up their live streaming equipment. Just as they were about to undress the girl, a mysterious man silently infiltrated the room. With the sound of a tranquilizer gun, the two little devils fell to the floor before they could react. At the same time, the meticulously planned trap set by Carolina had taken a turn for the worse. Langer demanded Nina's full involvement. They had been lying in ambush deep in the forest for hours. Matt and a truck full of special forces officers were speeding down the mountain road. Suddenly, Langer's bodyguard appeared in a car, tailgating his vehicle. Meanwhile, on the other side of the forest, Carolina and the man posing as Nina's ex-husband had just reached the log cabin when they were attacked. They could only search for courage amidst the hail of bullets. Just as Langer's bodyguard gave the signal, a huge truck suddenly sped out from the front, ramming and overturning the special forces vehicle onto the roadside. Langer's bodyguard also floored the gas pedal, chasing after Matt and aggressively crashing into his car. The roles of hunter and prey were undergoing a terrifying reversal. After Matt's car and the special forces vehicle were attacked, Carolina and her teammates fled into the forest under a hail of bullets, unaware that they were walking into a deadly trap set by Langer. Langer and Nina watched from the watchtower. Stun bullets rained down on their prey. Along with Nina's accurate shot to the man's neck, Langer also shot Carolina down. As Langer looked down at Carolina, who was slowly losing consciousness, a confident smile spread across his face. Meanwhile, in another development, no one survived the special forces vehicle. Matt's car was overturned on the side of the road, a pool of blood inside, but no sign of him. Nina escorted her fake husband to an underground sewer. After Langer nodded in agreement, she handcuffed the man to a pipe, coldly questioning if he still remembered the tragedy of her sister. Then she pulled the trigger in revenge. Langer didn't kill Carolina on the spot, but buried her alive in a coffin deep in an open field in the forest. He was unaware that Nina had secretly sent him the location data from the car beforehand. However, due to a car accident that left him in a coma, he was taken to the hospital by passersby. When he tracked the location to the scene, Carolina was already on the verge of suffocation. When the police excavated the scene, they were shocked to discover that the open field contained many female corpses and their internal organs. But when Matt looked at an aerial photograph of the burial pits, these precisely arranged pits formed a complete star map of the Perseus constellation. This was clearly a masterpiece that Langer had deliberately left behind. He waited for people to discover his disgusting artistic manifesto. Having just gotten their revenge, Nina and Langer returned home intending to rest for a while. Suddenly, the police burst through the door. The cold handcuffs immediately locked Langer's wrists. Facing Matt, Langer showed no sign of distress. Instead, he wore a mocking smile. As he was being escorted to the police car, Langer stared intently at Nina, a smile playing on his lips. Nina cooperated with the police, returning to the underground sewer at the crime scene and rescuing her fake husband, who was barely alive. After a meticulous pursuit and elaborate setup, Langer, burdened with countless crimes, was finally thrown behind bars. However, he maintained his characteristic smile, as if this trial were merely a scene in a play he himself had orchestrated. Not long after, Matt received an urgent notification from the police. After searching Langer's mansion, they found no evidence of any crime. He and Nina went to the secret room hidden behind the oil painting, but when they pushed open the door, they found only hundreds of lilies. When Nina opened the cabinet that used to hold surgical instruments, she found it neatly filled with gardening tools. Amidst their utter panic, Matt's attention was drawn to a strange object among the flowers, his son's watch. A premonition of something terrible immediately struck him. Trembling, Matt called Jack's house, only to be told the boy had left long ago. When they stormed into the dilapidated log cabin by the park, there was no one inside. Only a tablet on the table flickered with an eerie light. The video playing on the screen made them disbelieve their eyes. Their seemingly obedient son was cruelly abusing animals and bullying a girl on camera. The police had unearthed numerous animal remains in the backyard. Just as Nina, trembling, finished watching the end of the video, the frame froze on a scene of two children tied to a table in a log cabin in the woods. They drove there frantically. They searched the entire house but found nothing. In their despair, Nina suddenly remembered a detail from the video. She found the two children barely alive under loose floorboards on the balcony. After taking the children to the hospital, Matt and Nina were forced to face a harsh reality. Outside the hospital room, they were distraught, constantly blaming each other. Both believed that the other's negligence or movement had led to their son's twisted psychology. Looking at their little son on the hospital bed, they desperately realized that this child might very well become someone exactly like him in the future. Although they had successfully put Langer in jail, they now felt they had lost miserably. Langer had used this method to mock their so-called justice and morality. Just as they were drowning in grief, the police received a report from the parents of the female student accusing their son of illegal detention. Matt insisted on waiting until the two children woke up before questioning them about the situation. However, the events unfolded far beyond the initial evidence. A female corpse with her internal organs removed appeared near the fountain in the city park. The method of killing was identical to previous serial murders. Even the specialized liquid-resistant gloves used by the killer were exactly the same. Meanwhile, Langer was being held in a detention center 300 kilometers away. This irrefutable evidence immediately shattered all police accusations against Langer. Carolina angrily pointed out numerous bodies found in the forest, but her superior stated that those bodies had no direct link to Langer. Furthermore, the burial site had become an abandoned wasteland decades earlier. Thus, Langer was not only released but also portrayed as a victim before the media, accusing the prosecutor's office of persecuting an innocent businessman. He successfully gained public sympathy. When Nina returned home, the sight before her horrified her. The prosecutor, impersonating her ex-husband, was covered in blood and tied up in her bedroom. Before she could react, the special forces team broke down the door and stormed in. Nina was handcuffed, and the fake prosecutor was already dead. At the trial, a recording became the decisive piece of evidence. Nina admitted she wanted revenge on the prosecutor for her sister who had been raped. This recording was meticulously provided by Langer himself, along with DNA, blood, and bodily fluids taken from the victim's fingernails and body, all of which belonged to Nina. These were biological samples that Langer had collected after whipping her. Now they became irrefutable evidence that left her with no way to deny the charges. Ultimately, Nina was sentenced to prison for murder. All of this was part of Langer's plan. Matt and Carolina both knew perfectly well that this was a trap set by Langer, but they couldn't find any evidence to prove it. At the courthouse gate, Matt clenched his fists so tightly that veins popped out. If it weren't for the circumstances, he would have punched Langer right there and then. However, Langer's revenge wasn't over yet. The police chief suddenly approached Carolina, presenting a document accusing her of abuse of power, indirectly causing the death of a special forces team. He immediately handcuffed her. Matt pieced together the entire sequence of events and realized that Langer had seen through their plan from the beginning. At every crucial point, he carefully collected Nina's biological samples and ultimately executed a perfect counterattack. Even more frightening, Matt reasoned that Langer likely mimicked the methods of other serial killers by constantly changing his criminal characteristics to deceive the police. As long as the real serial killers continue their crimes, Langer will be able to live forever outside the law. However, what Matt doesn't know is that this game is far more complicated than he imagined. A man wearing glasses visits the prison. This man is the high-ranking prosecutor who previously assigned Carolina to investigate this case. The person he meets is Nina. It turns out that Langer was just a pawn in this conspiracy from the beginning. The real mastermind is now smiling triumphantly from behind the prison bars. The film ends here. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and see you again.